So this is a new file. As we've done in the past, one of the first things to do is format those units. So type in units, architectural, 16th. No, actually, let's round off to the nearest 32nd in this case. I think that's what we've been doing with the others. And then 0.00. By the way, these units, if I set the precision to something different now, I can always come back and change it later. I remember one time I was doing some 3D modeling before I used SketchUp, and I would set that tolerance or that precision really high because sometimes there were the models were off just by a little bit, and this allowed me to double check that. Anyway, I'll leave it at a 32nd, and I'll go ahead and click OK. The next thing I want to do is save this as. So I'll type save as, and then I will go to my Google Drive, into my folder. And then from here, what I'd like to do is save this as, it'll be first initial, last name. And the file name here is going to be X. And notice how I have an X plan, I have an X site, I'm going to have an X border here. So I'm going to type that in. X border. Let me close that message. So it's going to be first initial, last name, X border. A little later, we're going to start the elevation, that elevation drawing. That's going to be first initial, last name, X elevations. And you'll see why I'm using these X's soon. So X border and click on save. All right. And then I'm going to fix my command line because I want to expand that to show me a couple of lines. And then I also want to click and drag from the bar right up here above the X. I don't want to close it. I just want to click and drag there. First of all, make sure that I'm able to float it, which I am, and then click and drag that down further, further, further until it gives me that ghosted image across the entire screen. And now I release my mouse button, and now it is docked. So I wanted to make sure I took care of that. All right, so this is going to be the border. Oh yeah, let me turn off the grid. That's just personal preference. And what we're going to do is we're going to be printing out PDF files of the floor plan, site plan, elevations, and we're going to print them out on 11 by 17 sheet sizes, which means that if I'm going to use that sheet size, then I want to generate a presentation border that is just a little bit smaller than that. So here's how I recommend you do this. And by the way, we're just on layer 0 right now. I'll take care of layers later. I'm going to zoom out a little bit here. And now that I've zoomed out, I'm going to come over here to my rectangle tool. Rectangle is nothing more than a polyline. So I'm going to click on rectangle. And my start point, I want that to be 0, 0, and enter. So it's starting from point of origin. And then I want my border to be an 11 by 17 board. I'm realizing just by looking at the values there that I really zoomed out. So I'm going to zoom in a bit here, a little more. There we go. And then pan this over. So what I'd like to do is enter my coordinates for an 11 by 17 sheet. And along the X, this is going to be 17. So I type in 17, comma, 11. And then I enter. So what I've done is I started at 0, 0. I came over 17 and then I went up 11. So that's how I picked my two corners. To make sure, I'm going to zoom extents first. And then I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. There we go. And then I'm going to come over here to measure. And I'm going to use my quick measure. And when I do the quick measure, I make sure that it is 17 inches by 11. And it's going to show me 1 foot 5 inches, which is 17 inches. And then my four corners are 90 degrees. So I know that this is the correct size. If I move my cursor out here, it says 11 inches that way, and then 1 foot 5 that way. All right, so I'll tap the escape key and then zoom extents. Now, this is the overall size of the paper. But what we want to do is we want to stay inside that sheet size, and we want to give ourselves a margin. And with PDF these days, you don't need that much of a margin. And I'm going to say that we're okay getting away with about a 1/4 inch of a margin all the way around. I have an architectural scale over here that I'm looking at, and 1/4 inch is a good distance to keep. So since this, I'm going to zoom out, since this is a polyline, I can go ahead, let me tap the escape key. I can go ahead and offset. So I'll type O, enter, and the offset distance is simply going to be 1/4 of an inch. You can type it in like that, or you can type it in like this, 0.25, and it defaults 2 inches. So either one is fine. I'll enter. And now it's asking me to select the object offset. I select this object, and I'm going to offset it to the inside. I'll click here. And then I'll tap the escape key. And I'll select this outer rectangle and delete it because I don't need to see that sheet size. Unless, and let me do this, unless you want to leave it there for now, just as a guide. I'll show you a little later. I'll show you what we can do with this. If you'd like to keep it just for reference. So I'll go back to my quick measure and I look in here, and yes, it is now 1'4.5" by 10.5. So great. Let me tap the escape key. So this is the border out here. And then this rectangle is my sheet. So what I'd like to do now is I'm just going to zoom in right here for a moment. And here's what I'd like to point out. Usually with your borders, you could create a new layer, and I'll do that right now, like this, new layer. And I'll give this new layer a name. Let me just make that a little bit bigger, expand this. I wish it just remembered these settings. I feel like I always have to come back in here and reset this. Let me widen that up a little bit too. And color plot. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, and then the layer itself, name. All right, so in here, I'll create a new layer. And that new layer is going to be, I'm going to call it A for architectural border. And I know that sometimes we have a tendency to spell border with an B-O-A-R-D, but make sure that you spell it B-O-R-D-E-R. Architectural border. And what I like to do is I like to keep it using color white. And I know that I've said many times, that these colors, we're going to associate line weights with them. So white is going to be okay. And you'll see why in just a moment. So I'll go ahead and make that my current layer. I'll double click it. And then I'm going to dock or anchor it to the left. So it's just sitting there. Okay. So we assign colors for line thicknesses. With borders, though, we do this a little different because, and I'm going to look up, see if I can do this with everybody. Got my virtual machine running. I'll come over here and I'll just do architectural border. I want you to see this. And those are just a little too fancy. Architectural. Let me do this. Don't let this title confuse you. All right, so something like this. I just want you to see this. Notice what this is, a construction document border. We're not going after that, but I'm showing this to you to demonstrate that we do put borders and they do have a thickness to them. So if I go here also, this is another way of doing it. And let me just click on that. And no, I don't have an account. So hang on a second. Let's see if there's another border I can look at. Yeah, this one here. All right. So they're showing us here how to put together a title border. But what I wanted to point out, and I don't know if I can do this, open image in new tab. Yes. Okay. Now let me just zoom in. What I wanted to point out is that we go with a heavier line weight, but instead of using colors, we're going to do this a little different. And again, this is construction document. We are not doing construction document, but we are going to put some text on here in just a minute. Let me bring this back. I want to see if there's any other quick examples to show you of borders. This one's a little more straightforward. And see, this is what I mean. You see how it's a bold, heavy line. And really what we're doing with that is we're framing our views of our floor plans and of our elevations. This one is a little bit more like a presentation border. And let's see if I can go to one more. Well, this one is not presentation because it's got a little too much information down here, but you can see the thickness of that line weight. That's what I wanted to point out here to you. All right, so let me minimize that and come back over here. So here's what I can do. I can select this polyline and then I can right click it and I can go to my properties. And in my properties, let me float this right here and make it a little bit bigger. There we go. You'll notice that the geometry right here is showing me something called a global width. And I see this geometry with this global width only with polylines. It doesn't work with lines. So what I can do to that global width right now is I can change it. And I'm going to exaggerate this a little bit and go with a 1/4 inch global width. Now watch, I'm going to enter. And look at what that does to that polyline. It gives it a width. I'm going to tap the escape key and I'm going to zoom out. That's a bold border. In fact, that's a little too bold because it's going to take away from our drawing that's going to sit inside the border. But I just wanted to show this to you. And this is why we go with polylines instead of line weights, because this allows me to have real good control. And I don't have to assign one color to just that one line weight. So instead of it being that thick, I'm going to select it and I'm going to change that global width from a 1/4 and I'll knock it down to a 1/16 of an inch and enter. And then tap the escape key and then zoom out. And now that is better. And I may want to make that a little bit thinner. But at least when I go to use this border and I put my site plan on here and I put my floor plan elevations, it's going to look very nice. It's going to look like it's framed out. So that's going to be good. Now, the other thing I can do is I can round these corners if I wanted to. So let me close. Actually, let me dock this anchored on the left. Okay. So if I wanted to, I can go to fillet. So I'll type F and enter. And then under the options that you see listed in the command line, you see that there's polyline as an option. Now, I'm just going to use the down arrow because I want to be able to see these options on screen too. So down arrow shows me the options. And I'm going to select, actually, no, before I select polyline, I have to change the radius. So I'm going to click on radius. And let's say that I want my corners to be a 1/2 inch. So I'll type in 1/2 inch and enter. And then it still is giving me the options. So I'll use my down arrow key and I'll select polyline. And then it says select your 2D polyline. So I'll go ahead and click on the polyline like this. And notice how it gave me the radius on all 4 corners. So that's really nice to be able to do that. So that's an option. If you wanted to go with rounded corners like that and whatever radius you want, that's fine. If you'd like to keep it the way it was, that's okay too. If you want to embellish a little bit, you're more than welcome to. And here's something I've done in the past. So I'll come over here and sometimes I'll take this and I will go to my properties and I'll change it to, well, let's see. Yeah, 1/32. So that thins it out. I'll tap the escape key and then I'll type O for offset. And I'm going to offset 1/8 of an inch. And I take this line or this polyline and I offset it to the inside. And because 1/32 is relatively thin, I get a nice effect. So that's doable. If you wanted to try that, you don't have to. Here's something else you can do now that I have those in place. Let's see. Okay, let me do this. What I'd like to do is I'd like to make a nice detail on that corner. So what I need to do actually right now is explode my polylines. So I'm going to type X and enter. And I'm going to select both of them. And I'm just going to use a crossing window like this and enter. And when I explode them, they go back to being line segments. And if I select one of the lines and I go to the properties, notice it tells me it's a line. And in that geometry, I don't have a width. But I'll show you how to change that or work around that. So here's all I wanted to do. I wanted to type, let's see, TR for trim. No, not that. I want EX for extend. Sorry. Let me just go back. EX for extend. I'll select it. I just want to extend this line here, this one here. And then I want to do the same thing over on the other side. And this could be a little time consuming, but worth it. And then one more. Okay, and then spacebar, zoom it out. And then I'm going to type TR, enter, and I'll trim this segment and then this one. And then over here, I'll trim that one and that one. Zoom out. Oh, and it looks like, I see what I did. I kind of like that accident that I ran into. Okay, so let me zoom in over here and I'll draw a line from this point down, track it right there and connect it. There we go. Same thing over here, a line from this point, track it, click, and then click, enter. All right, so this is what I wanted to achieve. So now I do want to get a global thickness. So I have to convert this back to a polyline. And the way to do that, I simply just join these line segments. So I'm going to type J, enter. And I'm just going to window all of it like this. And then enter. It tells me 12 objects converted to one polyline. That's what the command line says. If I hover, click, I see all of these. And now if I go to my properties, it's a polyline. And here's the global width. And I'll change that global width to, in my case, I want to try 1/32 of an inch and enter. Tap the escape key, take a look at it. And that's what I was after. So have fun, embellish, do whatever you'd like. And then here's another thing that I'll do. Let me go ahead and erase this. Delete. And let me go and start again. Offset by 1/4 of an inch to the inside. And now let's say I just want a line at the top and line at the bottom. So I'm going to trim. So I'm going to type TR, enter. And I trim this segment and this one. So top and bottom. But when I select them and I go over here to my properties, it tells me, oh, it did actually keep the polyline. Oh, that's nice. So now I can go ahead and change that global width, and I'll set that global width to, let's say, 1/16 of an inch. Tap the escape key. And then close Layer Properties Manager. There you go. All right. So let's say this was not a polyline. So right now it is because I trimmed it. But let's say I had exploded that polyline, and I'll just type X here. And when I do that, this now goes back to being a line. So to fix that, I need to convert it to a polyline. Now I could just come right over here to polyline. And I could have started just drawing a polyline like this all the way across. But because I exploded, that wasn't the case. So let me just delete that. What you have to do is this. You have to use the polyline editing commands. And those are found under, is it under modify? On this drop down? Yes. Okay. I'm going to show you the small icon and then I'm going to give you the keyboard shortcut. So this one here, it says edit polyline. And that's the one I want to use. But if that icon is too small for you to select, then the keyboard shortcut is PE for polyline edit. So you type PE and enter. Select polyline. Now, we don't have a polyline, we have a line. So you're going to select the line like this and then enter because it says, do you want to turn it into a polyline? Yes, I do. I enter. And then from here with these options, I can actually put the width in now directly. I don't have to go to my properties window. So I can type or click on width and I could say new width, 1/32 of an inch, enter. And notice how it changes it. And I'm realizing that it doesn't match the one above. So I can go back to width and change it to 1/16 of an inch. There we go. And then just close out of my polyline edit command. And then tap the escape key. And that's how you can take a line, type PE, convert it to a polyline, and then make changes. So there you have it. What else can you do with this? Let me see. Is there an option? Can I take this? Yes. Okay, so look at this. It's a polyline, and if I hover over this midpoint grip, I can convert to arc, and then I'll just bring it straight down just a little bit, and I've got to zoom in here for a moment. And I don't want to really be exact, so I'm just going to pick right here and click, and then tap my escape key, zoom out, and now I have a nice curve to it, a gentle curve, if I wanted that. So I'll undo, and I'm just throwing options out. All right, the next thing I want to do is save this. So Control S, command line shows me that I have completed a quick save. Let me go ahead and pause and see if there's any questions. And I'm looking for the pause button. There it is. All right, so that takes care of it for the border. And again, this outer line here is representing the overall 11 by 17 sheet size. I will show you how to take care of this a little later. Not yet, not yet. But I'm going to make sure that, well, little hint here. I'm going to put this on a different layer, and then I'm going to set that layer to no print. But I will introduce that layer name later on, not yet. So we'll just leave all of this alone. And it's sitting on layer 0, and it's color white, and a border is also color white, and that's all right for now. All right, so next thing to do is putting a title for your project. And you can call it anything you want. You can use your last name as the title. And I'm just looking at some last names here, if I can find any. Let's see, Wilson, right? So I can call it the Wilson residence or the Lawson residence, whatever you want to do. Or you think of something else, that's fine. So what I'll do is drop in some text, and we haven't talked about text, so now's a good time to get into that. So I'm going to come up here to my annotate tab. And under annotate, I have an option, and this is in the text panel. I can use what's called multi-line text or single line text. But before I get into that, I do want to set up my own style, my text style. So just like we've loaded line types into our drawings, and we've also added layers, we have to do something similar here with text. So with the text, there's a very, very small arrow over here, and that's for the text style. You click on that, pause for a moment, and it takes you into the text style dialog box. If that icon is a little too small to get to, I believe it is the ST keyboard shortcut, style, or you can just type it all in, style, and enter. So from here, you notice that I have two default styles, annotative and standard. I'm going to leave those alone, and we're going to create our own style. So what I'd like you to do is just come over here to new and give your style a name. So we'll just call this one border. Sorry, and I should spell that right. And I'm not going to say border text because that's redundant. So I'm just going to say border, which means it applies to the text that I'm going to be using for my presentation border. I'll go ahead and click OK. So it's added border to my styles. And now font name, I need to associate a font with that style. So under the font name, you can go ahead and take a look and pick any font that you want, so long as it is readable / legible. So here's one that I would not use. Let's see. I can usually find it real quick. Oh, it's hang on. And there are a lot of fonts to pick from. There's one in here called Script. Yeah. That is not easy to read. So with architectural drawings, we always want to select fonts that can be read quickly and easily. And this is not one of them. So stay away from fonts like this. Let's see, what else do we have here? You know, that is difficult to read. So pick a font that is legible. And I'm going to come over here, and I know that there's a font called, let's see, there's Century Gothic. That's relatively easy to read. There is City Blueprint. If you're interested, it looks a little like architectural lettering, but it might be difficult to read. So think about it. And by the way, you don't have to agree. I mean, whatever you select now, you can always come back and change the font that's associated with it. You're not locked into it. There's also this Country Blueprint if you're interested. And then be careful with fonts that have serifs. So like Times New Roman. Let's see if I can find Times. Times. There we go. Right. So this one is relatively easy to read. This is what they use in newspapers, and you're fine with that. But my recommendation is go with a font that is sans serif, that doesn't have those extra, I don't know, features to them. This one is not easy to read, so I'm not going to go with that one. So for me, I'm going to come up here, and I've used this one in the past. And I believe it's the Century Gothic that I've used. Yeah, so that one is relatively straightforward. So I'm going to go with this one. You pick any font that you want. Again, that's easy to read. All right, so Century Gothic it is. And then for the size, over here, don't click on anything. We're going to take care of this later. So I always leave the height at 0. And then for the effects, you can have this show up upside down if you wanted. I don't know why, but it's there. Backwards. And by the way, these are remnants of the AutoCAD from years ago when we didn't have some options available to us. We would have to do the effects here. The width factor. So instead of 1, if I change that to 0.5, this is like condensing the font. Or I can extend it to 1.5, and that's a little too much. So leaving it at 1 is fine. I've changed some fonts width factor sometimes to like 0.75 or 0.9. 1 is okay. And then we have the obliquing angle. And this obliquing angle is there because engineering drawings, they slant their text. So if I type 15, they slant it in this direction, or they can slant it in the opposite direction. No, but I think I've seen it more in that way. Anyway, this was our way of cheating to get an italic version of the font before we could do that using Windows. So you can change the oblique angle if you want. I'm going to leave it at 0. And then I'm going to click apply. So make any changes that you want. You can come back and change them later again. You can even change or rename this. So that border, if you click it again, notice how it highlights and you can change it. But I'm not going to. Just wanted to show that to you. Already in use, close. Okay. And then I'm going to set it as my current text style. So border it is, and then I can go ahead and close. All right. And then if I look up here in my annotate tab, text panel, border is my current text style. If I click on the drop down, it shows me the other ones that are there too. So I'll keep it with border. Yes, it's showing me a text size of 0.2. I just ignore that for now because I'm going to make some modifications here. All right. So here's what I wanted to show you in terms of the text. I can enter text either as multi-line or single line. I'm going to do both so you can see the difference. So I'm going to start with single line text. I'm going to click on that. And by the way, keyboard shortcut for single line text is DT for text. Enter. And it says start point. And I click there. And again, it doesn't matter where I click because I'm going to move this around later. And now it's asking me to specify the height. So for the height, for the title, you don't want to go with anything that's too big. And I'm looking at my architectural scale again. I just keep it handy. And I think a text height of 1/4 inch should be okay for starters. You can always make it bigger or smaller later, but I'm going to start with 1/4 inch. So I'm going to type in a height of 1/4 of an inch and enter. And now it wants me to specify rotation angle. 99.9% of the time it's 0, so I'm just going to enter. And notice how now I have a blinking cursor. Well, it's not blinking, but it's there. And I'm going to type in the title of my project. So I'll use my last name like this. And then I'll type in residence. And then I'm going to enter. And when I enter, it takes me to the next line. So just to prove to you the difference between this single line text and the multi-line text, I'm going to put another line in here. You don't have to do this. I'm just showing this to you as an example. And I'm going to type in Chicago, comma, Illinois. And then I enter. And again, just as an example, now I'll type in a zip code. And I'll put in the zip code, our downtown zip code, which is 60601. And enter. And as you can see, I can keep entering, takes me to the next line. But when I'm done, instead of putting in text, I just tap the enter key one more time. And now I have my text. And the reason this is called single line text is because when I zoom in here, this is a single line of text. This is its own single line. And so is this. I have 3 lines of text. Each one of them is a single line. They have no relationship or they don't belong as one. They aren't not one. That's single line text. And then to edit, I can come in here, double click it, change the name, and I'm not going to change anything. I just want you to see. And then tap the escape key when I'm all done. Now, that's single line text. Next, I want to go with multi-line text. And then keyboard shortcut for that is MT, multi-line text. So MT it is, and then I'll enter. And now this one is asking me to specify a corner, first corner. So I'll pick this as my first corner. And now it's prompting me to specify the opposite corner. So right away I can tell that my text is going to be bound to this box. So I'll just click right here for now. And when I do that, now it's changed. Now look at the ribbon. It looks like I'm in a word processing program. So I'll just go ahead and type in the same thing I put in there before. So I'll start with my name. And notice how it dropped it to the next line because my box, when I made it small. And that's fine. I'll just go ahead and enter now to take me to the next line. And I'll put in the address. and then enter for the zip. And now if I enter, it's just going to keep adding lines. So with multi-line text, you cannot enter to terminate. So I'll go back here, and when I'm all done, I'll come up here and close the text editor, or simply click outside of that box. So close text editor, and I have my text. Now look at this. If I click on it, everything gets highlighted. And I now have this grip over here where it gives me what's called the column width. So if I click on that, I can now extend that box, and now it's going to fit the word residence on the same line. And I'll click and change that. So this is pretty nice because I am now using all 3 lines of text belong to one body of text. So if I take that grip again and I bring it in, notice how it's going to change everything until it fits, or it drops it down to the next line to make it fit. And now if I tap or if I double click on the text, it takes me right back in. And if I want, I can edit the text here, and then I can also increase this width, take it over to there. All right. So that's the difference between the two. Multi-line text, all in one. Single line text, each one is separate. And there are advantages to using one in certain situations versus another. You get to pick it. So here's what's nice about multi-line. I can pick the multi-line text, and then I come over here to my properties, and if I want to, I go over to my justification, and instead of top left, I change that to top center. And notice where that grip point shows up, right there at the top and at the center. And then if I go back to my properties and I change it from top center to, say, middle center, look at where it's placing that grip. So then I can move my text based on that grip and justify it to a midpoint or an endpoint, and everything's going to line up real nice. Over here with this text, if I select it, I can go to the properties and I can do the same thing. I can change the justification, and I'll change it to, let's say, center. But it only does it to one. I now have to pick the other one and then the other line of text, go back to properties, change that justification. It shows me that it varies now because it still has the top text selected. So I'll just go into the justification drop down, and I'll just do top center like this. And it does center it. So it does get the job done. Either one works, but here's what I'll say. For what we're doing in our border, we just need one line of text, and it's just going to be the name. So let me tap the escape key. And because I was just sampling this, I'll take that and delete it. Take that line and delete it. And then I can come over here to my text, my multi-line text, double click it, and then highlight all of this and backspace once more, and click away from the text. And it has accepted the changes. So in this instance, either one is going to work fine. But I'm going to stick with single line text because there's no need for the multi-line. So I'll take this text, and what I'd like to do is just move it over here, and I want to center it on my sheet. So let me just drop it here for 1 second and then zoom in. And what I'd like to do is change the justification from top center to, and I'm going to pick bottom center. Okay. And then I'll take that grip point and I'll hover until I find the midpoint. And if I can't find it, I'm going to shift right click, force it to find the midpoint of this line segment. And there's the midpoint. I'll click, and it's been accepted. So now it's centered. Let me tap the escape key. And that's what I wanted in this case. And then there's something else I might be able to do, and that is to trim that line, the polyline right there. So let me try this. Sometimes it works. So I'll type TR, enter, and I'll select the polyline, select object, Are you going to let me trim? Let's see. No. Okay. It usually does. Do I need to use my multi-line text? Let me try something here. If I just place that multi-line text somewhere here. Okay, hang on a second. Dropped it all the way in the corner, so I'm just going to pick it up. Shift right click, and I'm going to select, which one do I want? None. So I'm just basically turning off all object snaps just for a moment here, and I'll click there. Now let me tap the escape key and let me see if I can trim. Will it work now? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. That's interesting. Okay, no worries, because I get to show you another command. So what I'd like to do is break it. So watch this. And it's up here in my home tab under my modify panel. There is a break option. It's break at point or just simply break. But what I like to do is type it into the keyboard, and I believe it's BR. Yep. Break, enter. And I basically just want to break my polyline right here, and I'll take it over. It's a second point somewhere here. Did it break that? Yes, there's that segment. I broke it. I'll delete it. It's still a polyline. And now let's see if I can trim. TR, enter. Will this trim out? No, and that's fine. Okay, so I can take this and just bring it over right there. And then I can take my text and maybe just bring it down a little bit to make it fit in between. And if you want to be really, really, really precise, and I get it, because that's how I am, I'll draw myself a line from the midpoint. Hold on a second. I don't have it as a running object snap, so I'll turn it on, and I'm going to turn off center. Okay. So I'll take it from the midpoint here, up, tap the space bar. I'm going to do a distance check. DI, enter from here over that way. And it looks like if I take it over 2 inches. Okay. So O for offset, 2, enter from here over that way and over that way. Space bar, take this line, delete it, and then come over here, type TR, enter, trim that segment. Why does it not let me? Select object to trim. This is odd that it's not letting me trim, but that's all right. So what I'll do is I'll just select it, use the grips, and just lock it into that extension point right there, and do the same thing over here. And then erase this line and that one. And that's the title I want. Keeping it really simple and straightforward. I'll be able to change this if I want later, and I might do that just so you can see how this works. But here's the goal. Have this border ready for our next class session so that I can show you how we're going to use it to start putting together our presentation views.